Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to this segment of Coach Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day. Our recitation is from Gauri Mahalla Pehla. Gauri Mahalla Pehla, Paunay Paani Agni ka mel, Chanchal chappal budh ka khel, Na darwaje daswaं dwar, Bujre gyani ehyo bichar, Kathta bhagta sunta soi, आप बिचारे सुज्ञानी होई रहाओ. जय कारण तट तीरथ जाही, रतन पदार्थ घट ही माही. पढ़ पढ़ पंडित बाद बखाने, भीतर होंदी वस्त न जाने. हाउ ना मुआ मेरी मुई बलाए, ओह ना मुआ जो रहा समाए. कहो नानक गुरु ब्रह्म दिखाया, मरता जाता नदर न आया. Relatively short passage, but packed with profound meaning. And it actually touches on a very hot topic, that of reincarnation and transmigration, that we see have very strong opinions around, wrapping around it. There are those who insist, yes, we reincarnate, and there are those who say, no, we don't. So let us try and see this in a more nuanced way, because the question being asked here is, what is it that dies and what is it that persists? So the answer may be a little more nuanced, at least food for thought. Let's consider the first section. Guruji says it is the blending of air, water, and fire that constitutes the body. Paunay Paani Agni ka mel, mixture, a blend. So the body is a blend of the elements. And this becomes the playground of a fickle and slippery mind. Chanchal chappal budh ka khel. It becomes the playground for this mind, which is fickle and slippery. Chanchal chappal. And in this field, if you will, play field of the body and the mind, the body has 9 openings, 9 doors, openings, if you will, orifices, apertures, however you want to see it, through which the human body mechanism functions with the outside world. No darwaje, and then daswaं dwar, but there is a 10th doorway. And we shall consider what that might mean, although we are not going to offer a conclusive answer. Bujre gyani ehyo bichar. So this is deemed to be the hallmark of wisdom, to reflect on this, to understand this, the idea of how we are composed. What is the human being consist of? What does it consist of? And karta bhakta sunta soi aap bichare so gyani hoi. Through self-inquiry, aap bichare, does wisdom dawn. So gyani hoi. So the wise one is one who reflects on the self. And what they realize is the one creator, supreme being, soi, is itself the speaker, kathta bhakta, and the listener, sunta. In other words, within this mind-body play field, if you will, there sits the eternal self, who animates the play field, who causes the play field to come alive, because without that, the play field would be dead. And then, to explain this a little further, he says, Dehi marti bole paun. Dehi. We have to make a distinction here between Dehi and Dehe. Dehi is often misidentified with the body, which it is not. The body is Dehi. Dehi is the one that lives and breathes within the body. That's pretty clear here. Dehi mati bole paun. So it is the self, that is the Dehi, that lives within the Deh, which is the body, and breathes life into it. Bole paun. Bujre gyani mua hai kaun. Given this, take a guess. What is it that dies? And then he responds, Mui surt bad ahankar. O na mua jo dekhan har. What dies is that quarrelsome consciousness, surat bad. Bad also means without value, without meaning. So what dies is that consciousness which is without meaning and filled with ego pride. He's pointing to our ego sense. Jai karan tat tirath jahi ratan padarat ghati mahi. The motive for pilgrimages, which is essentially to find the self, or God, if you will, that jewel of self-knowledge, the Guru is telling us, is really housed within the heart. Ghati mahi. Why go to a pilgrimage to look for something that is already within you? That's the point. Pad pandit baad bakhanne. The Pandit is engaged in study and argumentation, but does not know the essence within. Bhitar hundi vastana janne. Again, that point is reiterated. It is within. So we have to really acquire knowledge of ourselves. How na mua meri mui bilaye, oh na mua jo reha samaye. Again, this is kind of repeating what has been said already, that it is not I that is dying, I here identified with the self. Meri mui balai. Balai is something that is kind of bad, and it is bad because it's deluded. And the reference here, bala, is to the ego consciousness. O na mua jo reha samai. That self that is sitting and animating and witness to this playfield of the mind and body never dies. Kaho Nanak, Gur Brahm dikhaya, marta jata nadar na aya. So when the Guru, the enlightener, gave me this knowledge, I realized from that perspective, nothing comes and nothing goes. So what we are being told here is that self-inquiry is the key to wisdom. Aap bichare so gyani hoy. And self-inquiry leads to an examination of the self, its nature and its persistence. And it gives us the insight that we need to be wise. So we see that in the first section, Guruji spoke about two distinct but amalgamated entities or substances. The material body, formed by a mix of elements, Paunay Paani Agni ka mel, and within this body were the 9 apertures. And with the body arises a fickle and unstable mind. And together, these, as we said, constitute the field of experience, because that is what we do. We experience one after the other. But there is also a hidden 10th passage within this playfield, this body-mind playfield, the Swadwar. And beyond this passage, this 10th channel, sits the self, who is really the ultimate cause, the doer, the animating force. It's like the master knower sitting in all individual fields of knowing, homogenized. So to know this persistent knowledge, self, the one that always abides, is deemed to be true knowledge by Guru Nanak. Aap bichare so gyani hoy. So the answer to the question, the fundamental question as to what dies and perishes, or what is it that persists, is kind of nuanced. Very clearly, what dies is ego consciousness, mui surt, which is without value, bad, and laced with a sense of separate I, ahankar, the sense of separate I. This is what dies. One way to look at this is to understand the mind as a kind of an epiphenomenon, which arises only when the spirit self breathes its animating force into the body. The mind arises when the spirit breathes itself into the clay body, Mati Andi, which is Hurt Samai. When that process happens, the epiphenomenon called a mind, a bipolar bridge, if you will, gets created between matter and the spirit. The self does not act directly, but indirectly through the mind. And at one end of this mind, this bipolar mind, is the ego consciousness. That is the tool with which the self wishes to function in this world. And it gets tied to the body and uses the brain to receive, process information. The other end of the mind remains connected with the self, although that connection is lost in a sense because the mind starts to become outward looking through those 9 orifices, if you will. So when the connection between the self and the body breaks, the worldly mind disappears. And that is symbolized by the Haume. What persists is the self. And so when you see it from that perspective, nothing really dies or departs. So this has important ramifications for the notion of reincarnation, transmigration. One would suggest that one thing is very clear from this passage. We can deduce that the personality that we create around our ego certainly does not survive death. That much is quite apparent from Guruji's Mui Meri Balai. It's that ego and the personality that surrounds it, the personality that we have developed, the I sense, that disappears. But on the other hand, there is a larger process going on. Nature, Maya, continues to reincarnate egos endlessly as part of Hukam. There is birth constantly of egos. But then the ego tends to create its own personality, forgets its connection with the self, and that process continues over and over again. But this particular personality that you have created, which has a particular name, does not survive. This is just food for thought, not any conclusive evidence, but from this model that we are being presented, it seems reasonable to assume that there is a unchangeable self that is always stable, does not die, does not take birth. And on the other end of the spectrum is Maya, which is constantly changing, constantly playing out its drama on the screen of this self, this consciousness. And the mind becomes a witness and a participant in that. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ